Good morning and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment teleconference titled From Appalachia to Alaska, Coal Development and the Environmental Justice Movement with Dr. Shannon Elizabeth Bell and Carly Weir. My name is Diana DeFazio, and on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. And you can find more information at akaction.org and healthandenvironment.org. I sent a link to the presentation slides yesterday to everyone who signed up for the call. If you signed up this morning, you can go to our homepage at akaction.org and click on the title of today's call to get to the slides. Please take a moment to download both presentations so you can follow along. And after the presentations, there will be time for questions and discussion. Now it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our first speaker. Shannon Elizabeth Bell is Assistant Professor of Sociology and core faculty member in the Environmental and Sustainability Studies program at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Bell's research falls at the intersection of environmental sociology, gender, and social movements. And her primary focus has been understanding the ways in which environmentally destructive industries acquire, maintain, and exercise their power, and discovering strategies for increasing the political participation of local citizens who are most affected by environmental injustices. Her award-winning first book, Our Roots Run Deep as Ironweed, Appalachian Women and the Fight for Environmental Justice, was published with the University of Illinois Press in 2013. And her recent book, Fighting King Coal, The Challenges to Micromobilization in Appalachia, was published by the MIT Press just last month. Welcome, Shannon. You may go ahead and begin.
Okay, thank you so much, Diana. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful teleconference. If you all could please move to slide 2, I will start the presentation there. Each year, coal-fired power plants in the United States release 386,000 tons of toxic air emissions, making these plants the leading source of air toxics in the nation. The negative consequences of burning coal are devastating, both for the climate and for the health of those who live close to these power plants. But the negative consequences of using this fossil fuel to generate power do not begin when it's burned. The entire life cycle of coal, including mining, processing, transport, burning, and the storage of coal combustion waste, generate tremendous environmental health hazards and ecosystem destruction. Next slide. My research over the past decade and a half has focused on the social, environmental, and health consequences of mining coal in Central Appalachia, which has historically been one of the top coal-producing regions in the United States. Many have argued that Central Appalachia serves as an energy sacrifice zone, a region where the land and much of the population are exploited in order to keep the cost of energy low for the rest of the nation. Next slide. Over the past 2 decades, more than 1 million acres of land and over 500 mountains have been destroyed in Central Appalachia by a surface mining technique known as mountaintop-removal coal mining. In this method of coal extraction, mountains are blown apart to expose thin seams of coal, which are scraped from the open scars with massive drag lines. The demolished earth above the coal, including rock, soil, and trees, is pushed into nearby valleys, creating valley fills, which bury streams and damage fragile ecosystems. Next slide. In the steep mountain terrain of Central Appalachia, most homes have been built in narrow floodplains next to rivers or creeks. When the mountains above these homes are deforested and flattened, there's nothing left to stop the rain from washing down hill slopes into the communities below. As a result, over the past 15 years, there have been repeated major flood events and landslides that have completely wiped out entire communities. As one resident of a coal community told me in an interview, quote, "Used to be years ago it would take 3 or 4 days of rain to bring this river up. You can take 3 or 4 hours of rain now, and it's like a flash flood. It's because these mountains now, they don't have anything to hold it back. You don't feel comfortable anytime it starts raining real bad. When it starts raining, you just don't know what's going to happen." Next slide. And I'm on slide 6 now. Maria Gano's family lives in Boone County, West Virginia. Their home sits beneath a massive mountaintop removal coal mine that's been responsible for repeated terrifying flood events since 2003. June 15th of that year marked the beginning of Maria Gano's awakening to the destruction the mountaintop removal coal mining was bringing to her community. On this day, her daughter's birthday, a nightmare flood threatened to wash Maria's home and family away. The Gano family feared for their lives that night as they heard the sounds of the flood washing away 5 acres of their property, including buildings on their land, access bridges, and even their family dog, who drowned in the flood that night. There was no safe place for them to go. The mountain above their house was sliding down, and the water around them was rising up, threatening to reach their house. As Maria relates, quote, "It was a night that I will never forget. If I live to be 100 years old, I'll never forget that. I literally thought we were going to die in this house." The experience of the flood was so traumatizing that it left psychological scars on Maria's children, especially her young daughter, who Maria told me suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from the flood. Anytime there was a thunderstorm or a weather alert, her daughter would not sleep. As Maria told me in our interview, next slide, "I found out one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was thundering and lightning, and I go in, and I find her sitting on the edge of her bed with her shoes and her coat and her pants on. And I found out then what it was putting my daughter through. And that is what pissed me off. How dare they steal that from my child? The security of being able to sleep in her own bed. The coal companies now own that. They now own my child's security in her own bed. And how can they expect me as a mother to look over that? How is it? What if I'd done this to their kids? What if I created terror in their children's lives? And that's what it's done to my children." Next slide. Flooding like what Maria Gano and her family experienced is not the only cost of living in an energy sacrifice zone. After coal is mined, it must then be transported to a coal preparation plant, where it's pulverized into a very fine powder and then chemically washed to reduce the sulfur content in order to prepare it for burning in coal-fired power plants. Typically, these coal preparation plants are located on or near mountaintop removal mines. Communities neighboring such plants contend with massive amounts of coal dust in the air, making life unbearable for some residents. Next slide. Take, for example, the town of Sylvester in Boone County, West Virginia, which was completely covered with coal dust when a coal company built a preparation plant adjacent to the community. Initially, there were absolutely no protections in place to shield the community from the very fine dust. Pauline Canterbury and Mary Miller, who called themselves the Sylvester Dustbusters, fought coal dust in the town of Sylvester for nearly a decade. As Pauline told me in our interview, next slide, "We could walk outside here on days like today and the sun looked like a kaleidoscope. Like he was looking through a kaleidoscope, there was so much coal dust in the air. And I mean, it just plastered our homes. Our homes were just completely polluted with it. You couldn't cook outside, you couldn't do nothing outside. And not only that, then it began to seep through your windows and things and coming inside your home. And I mean, right now, in order to get all the coal dust out of our homes, we're going to have to take them apart and rebuild them because there's no way you can get it all out. There's just no way you can do it." Next slide. The coal dust destroyed residents' homes and robbed the resale value. As Pauline told me, quote, "You know, it's not easy to sit and watch your home being destroyed, something you've worked for all your life. We found out through our lawsuit, because we all had our homes appraised for it, that our homes have lost 90% of their resale value." Pictured here on slide 11 is Mary Miller's beautiful brick home, which in the 1990s appraised for $144,000. It is now worth only $12,000. Reflecting on this experience, Pauline asserted, next slide, "We're being discriminated against. We're being sacrificed here for energy for the rest of the world, for more money for the people that already has more than they know what to do with. And it isn't right. To me, it isn't the American way. It will never be the American way for the America I envision that we're supposed to be here. It's just for greed. It's just greed. You know, why should we give up everything we own for somebody else to have cheap energy? For a world of people that's already pampered to death, it's the injustice of it." Next slide. After coal is crushed into a powder, it's then washed with a mixture of chemicals, many of which are known or probable carcinogens. Washing the coal generates a great deal of liquid coal waste, known as slurry or sludge. This coal slurry doesn't just contain the chemicals used to wash the coal, but it also contains a host of metals and semi-metal compounds such as arsenic, beryllium, and cadmium, which can be toxic when ingested or inhaled, and which occur naturally in coal. Coal slurry is either stored in huge impoundments on top of mountaintop removal mine sites, like the picture on the left, or else it's injected into old underground mine shafts through pipes like the one on the picture on the right. Both of these methods of storage have the potential to cause serious problems in nearby communities. Next slide. The coal slurry that's stored in impoundments on top of surface mining operations creates disaster risks for communities below these sites. For instance, in 1972, a massive coal slurry impoundment collapse in West Virginia sent a torrent of black coal waste through Buffalo Creek Hollow, killing 125 people and leaving thousands homeless. Another example is the Martin County, Kentucky disaster of 2000 that spilled 250 million gallons of coal waste and polluted more than 70 miles of Kentucky and West Virginia streams, killing all wildlife that it encountered. Smaller-scale slurry impoundment breaches occur on a regular basis throughout the mountains of Central Appalachia, leaving the fish in most streams in this area unfit for human consumption. Next slide. The coal slurry that's injected into old, unlined underground mine shafts leaves nearby communities, most of which get their water from wells, at risk for contamination of their drinking water supplies. Communities whose water has been contaminated with coal slurry from breaches in these injection sites have been found to have very high rates of liver cancer, kidney cancer, and brain cancer, as well as gallbladder disease, skin disorders, and even organ failure. Many of the people in these contaminated communities at first didn't realize that the brown or black water that ran through their faucets was actually coal waste. Many were told that they either just had iron in their water or that dirt was getting through their filter. So people got better water filters and just went on drinking, cooking with, and bathing in this contaminated water for many years, until they, and especially their children, started getting sick. Over the past decade, there's been an increasing number of cases of coal waste contamination found throughout the Central Appalachian region, like the community of Prenter in Boone County, West Virginia. Next slide. Now I'm on slide 16. In 2008, Maria Lambert and other Prenter residents began to suspect that their well water was contaminated with coal slurry from a nearby underground slurry injection site. In an interview that I conducted with her, Maria described the community meeting she and her parents attended where she first discovered that their water could be dangerous to consume. She told me at that community meeting, next slide, everybody was showing their water. Terry Keith had her water, and they were talking about the health issues and how to bathe in it was causing people's skin to itch and turn red, and how it had bad odor and how it looked coming out of the water tanks, and the different illnesses, the brain tumors, the gallbladder problems, stomach problems, children's teeth falling out, and all of these things. And it's like a light bulb going off all here, there, yonder, everywhere. And it's like my whole life flashing before my eyes because my children had lost their teeth, my parents had had cancer, we'd had our gallbladders removed, and all of these things was just like, oh no, it's not just us, it's the whole community, and we're not even blood related. The weekend after the community meeting, Maria went to the hospital with intestinal bleeding, which she asserts was from drinking the water all summer long in an effort to lose weight. As she describes, quote, I lost 50 pounds by drinking water all summer long. Our water, the water we should not have been drinking. They tell you, drink lots of water, you know. So when I found out that what I thought was supposed to be a good thing made me sick, I got so mad. Next slide. Donetta Blankenship from Rawl, West Virginia, is another victim of water contamination from a breach in an underground coal waste injection site. In our interview, she recounted the story of her coal waste-induced illness. Quote, I started getting sick at the end of February 2005. I stayed nauseous. I stayed tired. My urine was changing colors. I started having problems with my eyes. The first week of April, I started noticing I could look at my skin and it looked a little yellow. I thought maybe it was the sun doing it to me. And my husband, he kind of noticed it, even getting in my eyes. You know, the white parts of my eyes was looking yellow. Then on that Tuesday morning, my kids, I got them up for school and my daughter looked at me and she said, Mommy, she said, what's wrong with you? You look yellow. And she got Josh, my son, to look at me and he agreed with her. And I told him, I said, honey, when you look yellow, I said, that means you're about to die. Me not knowing, you know, that I was about ready to. I ended up having to go to the hospital. My enzymes, liver enzymes, was up in it was close to 10,000. A normal liver enzyme count is below 50. After a barrage of tests, it was found that the high content of heavy metals, particularly copper, and chemicals present in Donetta's well water had caused her to come close to liver failure at age 38. Next slide. There are many well-documented medical disorders that result from organic coal compounds in drinking water, including endocrine disruption, cancer, and most notably diseases of the kidneys and urinary tract. And on this slide here, I have some of the studies that give an overview of those. Next slide. A number of epidemiological studies, such as those listed on this slide here, slide 20, have revealed stark differences in health outcomes in Appalachian coal mining communities compared to non-coal mining communities in the region. Residents living in these coal communities suffer higher rates of hospitalization for certain respiratory and cardiovascular conditions, as well as higher rates of birth defects, cancer, mortality, and chronic illnesses, even after controlling for such variables as income and education. It is undeniable that the air and water pollution resulting from the mining and processing of coal in the Central Appalachian region have brought significant costs to the well-being and health of local residents. Next slide. However, these injustices have not gone without resistance. The increasing frequency of coal mining-related flooding, sickness, and water contamination has led to the emergence of a grassroots, women-driven environmental justice movement in Central Appalachia. My first book, Our Roots Run Deep as Ironweed, Appalachian Women in the Fight for Environmental Justice, which was published in 2013, documents some of the brave women who have led this fight. Next slide. However, while this environmental justice movement was started by local residents, most of the affected population in the region remains uninvolved in the movement. Especially in recent years, organizers have been forced to recruit participants from outside the region, expanding into non-coal mining areas and even non-Appalachian states through initiatives like Mountain Justice and RAMPS, which stands for Radical Action for Mountain People Survival. Both of these campaigns primarily target college students from outside the area. Next slide. I'm on slide 23 now. Given the enormity of the impacts of irresponsible mining practices on the individuals living in coalfield communities, why is there such limited movement participation at the local level? This is the overarching puzzle that my most recent book seeks to resolve. The commonly cited answer to this question is that people are dependent on coal mining jobs. While this may be a contributing factor, it's certainly not the entire story, as jobs have declined drastically over the past 60 years. Next slide. For instance, coal employment in West Virginia, which is the top coal-producing state in Appalachia, has declined steadily since the 1940s. In 1948, there were almost 132,000 coal miners in the state, while in 2010, there were only about 22,500. Even after accounting for the jobs that the coal industry indirectly provides, direct and indirect coal industry employment in West Virginia still only totaled about 46,000 jobs in 2008, which only accounted for about 7% of the total employed civilian labor force. The decline in mining jobs has primarily been due to technological advances in coal mining, and most recently to the rise of natural gas extraction due to the contentious practice of hydraulic fracturing used in combination with horizontal drilling. Next slide. So again, given the enormity of the impacts of irresponsible mining practices on the individuals living in coalfield communities, in combination with the decline in importance of the coal industry to employment, why is there such limited environmental justice movement participation at the local level? Next slide. In order to explore this question for my book, I conducted 13 months of field research over the course of 3 years, using a variety of data collection methods, including in-depth interviews, participant observation, content analysis, geospatial viewshed analysis, and an 8-month photo voice project with 54 women living in 5 coal mining communities. Next slide. Through the first phase of my field research, I identified 4 major factors suppressing local participation in the environmental justice movement, including depleted social capital in coalfield communities, indicating that there are high levels of isolation, sparse social networks, and few formal organizations in the region. Secondly, the coal-related hegemonic masculinity of the region, which limits men's willingness to participate in the movement. Third, the coal industry's cultural manipulation efforts to maintain and amplify the perception that coal is both the economic backbone of the region and the cultural identity of the citizenry. And 4, the fact the majority of the coal industry's environmental destruction and pollution is not visible to most local residents. But are these the only factors constraining local participation in the coalfield justice movement? It's difficult to know without being able to actually observe the process of becoming or not becoming an activist. Next slide. Now I'm on slide 28. To truly gain a better understanding of the barriers to social movement involvement, it's necessary to study a group of individuals who are not yet activists, but who are exposed to events and circumstances that could potentially lead to their recruitment into the movement. Next slide. In the second phase of my research, I attempted to create such a situation through using the feminist participatory action research method of photo voice, with 54 women living in 5 coal mining communities in southern West Virginia. Through this project, I sought to control for the barriers I identified in phase 1 of my research, while also creating what's called a micromobilization context. Basically, a situation that could potentially facilitate these photo voice participants' recruitment into the environmental justice movement. Through studying the women who chose to become involved in environmental justice activism and those who did not over the course of the 8-month project, I investigated the additional social factors that are hindering local coalfield residents' participation in the movement. Next slide. Across the 5 communities, I recruited a total of 54 local women for the project, 47 of whom had no prior involvement in the environmental justice movement, and 7 of whom were associated in some way with one of the environmental justice organizations in the area. I provided participants with digital cameras and asked them to take pictures to just tell the story of their communities, which included the problems and the positive aspects of life. Over the course of 8 months, I facilitated meetings every 3 weeks in each of the 5 communities so that the women could share and discuss their photo stories with the groups. The groups also held public exhibits and presentations of their photo stories, communicated their concerns to state legislators, and developed projects to initiate change in their communities. And some of these projects related to coal, some did not. So it was kind of across the board, all different aspects of life. Through gathering data over the course of the 8-month Photo Voice project, I was able to assess what factors constrained and facilitated participants' willingness to first criticize coal industry practices in a public setting, and secondly, become involved in the environmental justice movement. Next slide. So I'm on slide 31 now. While my purpose with this project was to study the social processes taking place during the course of Photo Voice, the participants had power over what they would photograph, what aspects of life to write about, and which photo stories they wanted to include in the public exhibits and presentations. Because they were the ones to decide what to photograph, many of the women didn't focus on coal industry issues at all and created photo stories such as this one titled Winter Glow that's simply about the beauty of the area. Next slide. A number of the women also used their photo stories to communicate non-coal related problems their communities were facing and their ideas for change, such as this photo story, which calls for the state legislature to pass a bottle deposit law. Next slide. But there were a number of women who did begin to take photographs and write photo stories about their anger and frustrations with the coal industry, such as this one here on slide 33 that reveals the destruction of mountaintop removal coal mining taking place in the mountains above this participant's home. Next slide. And this one, which describes the increasing flooding that coalfield communities have experienced because of surface mining activity. Next slide. For the purposes of my research, it was these women whom I was particularly interested in. Participants who at some point during the 8 months of the Photo Voice project stepped into the dangerous territory of publicly questioning the coal industry's practices in their communities. Of the 34 non-activist participants who completed the 8-month Photo Voice project, 18 of them created photo stories that were critical of the coal industry. While most of the Photo Voice women did not take that next step from critique of the coal industry to involvement in the environmental justice movement, for 5 of the women, Photo Voice did actually act as a springboard to activism. However, 3 of those 5 women soon broke ties with the movement, revealing another important barrier to activism at work in these coal mining communities. Next slide. During the project, these 3 women, whose pseudonyms are Arlene, Amber, and Eileen, became enthusiastic about speaking out against mountaintop removal mining when a coal company's mining permit threatened to destroy a community landmark called Heritage Rock, which is also a pseudonym. Arlene, Amber, and Eileen attended a public hearing about the permit, and Amber even spoke out against the permit in front of a large crowd of community members, public officials, and coal company executives. This was her first time speaking out like this, so it was a pretty big deal. Next slide. Despite the public outcry against the permit, however, the day after the hearing, the mining company tore down the rocks and the mining permit was approved. The realization that the community's passionate outcry against the permit could have had so little effect on the regulatory agency's decision completely shattered these women's sense of how a democracy is supposed to work. Next slide. In response to this experience, Arlene and Eileen created a joint photo story called The Death of a Community Treasure. As they stated in their photo story at the end, quote, "Obviously, this meeting was in name only. We now feel that the Department of Environmental Protection doesn't take the input of the community seriously." This event propelled these women into the movement. Soon after creating this photo story, a reporter from a prominent national newspaper contacted environmental justice groups in the area in hopes of finding local people to interview about mountaintop removal mining. Arlene, Amber, and Eileen quickly volunteered to meet with him. The reporter spent part of the day with the 3 women, who took him to see the mountaintop removal mine behind their homes and told him about the damage the mine had caused to their community. They invited me to accompany them on the tour, and I gladly agreed. Next slide. Toward the end of the day, when I was riding back with Arlene from the last viewing spot, she told me how excited she was about finding her voice and having the power to speak out against something she thought was wrong. "Shannon," she told me, "I think I'm becoming one of those radical environmentalists." When I called Arlene 4 months after the project ended for our follow-up interview, I expected to be met with the same level of enthusiasm that she had expressed 4 months earlier. Instead, I heard slightly hesitant responses. Toward the end of our interview, when I asked her if there was anything that she would have liked to have gone differently with the project, she responded, next slide, "I really hadn't intended for it to be so much against the mining industry as a whole. You know, I was against the mountaintop thing, but it seemed like, it kind of went to being against miners totally. It seems like there's just so much against it right now. And I kind of feel bad because I voiced my opinion on it and maybe, helped it to go that way. I don't know. That wasn't in my plans in taking the mountaintop removal pictures, but it just seems like it's everybody. Well, not everybody, but a bunch are going against the mining industry. And that's the way we made our living. My husband worked for the mines for 20-some years, and I wasn't against it altogether, just against the mountaintop part. After we saw the way it was going, we did back off. When I asked Arlene's daughter, Amber, if she was still involved with any of the environmental justice groups she had made contacts with during the project, she responded that, next slide, I've kind of retracted myself from certain groups and everything because I just felt like I didn't want my name to be out there with them because of some of the things that they were doing that I totally didn't agree with. I mean, I agree with their cause, but I think there's a way to go about things. They're taking stuff a little farther than what I'm comfortable with. Next slide. Now I'm on slide 42. She continued, we have to live here, and I respect their causes, and I know a lot of them, it's kind of what they've dedicated their life to, but don't try to force, From the othering language that Amber, Arlene, and others use to describe the individuals associated with the environmental justice organizations, it's clear that there is a disjuncture between their own personal identities and what they view as being the collective identity of the movement. In fact, Amber actually stated, I don't want to be involved with something like that. It's just not me. Amber asserted that it was not the reasons for the actions that troubled her, but the tactics that they used to accomplish their goals. Next slide. My follow-up interview with Dorothy, another PhotoVoice participant, helped illuminate a particular protest event that took place over the summer of 2009, which may have contributed to the PhotoVoice women's decision to disassociate from the environmental justice organizations. In describing her observations about the after effects of the protest, Dorothy exclaimed, quote, they got, who was it? Daryl Hannah. Daryl Hannah came in and got arrested. Well, that put it into national news, which really makes people talk and get upset. And it opened up a big can of worms because words got harsh. It put people back away from that negotiating line. It really is difficult to get them up to that point. It takes a lot of work to get the confidence, to get people to open up, to even just listen to you. I don't know how they'll get them to open up again. It'll take a lot of work. Next slide. While the environmental justice movement was started by local people fighting for the protection of their communities, in recent years, as the movement has gained national attention and organizers have reached out to people from outside the region, more and more non-local environmentalists have come to the coalfields to stand in solidarity with the local people. However, the recent influx of non-local environmental groups, college students, and celebrities into the movement, and particularly the protest tactics have chosen, may be changing the collective identity of the movement such that local residents are increasingly seeing it as an outsiders movement, making it more and more difficult to recruit and retain local people. The differences between locals and these newcomers have been amplified by the coal industry, which has characterized them as outsider extremists who are threatening not only the economy but the cultural identity of local residents. Thus, the surge of non-local people joining the movement over the past decade has provided an opportunity for the coal industry to capitalize on an insider-outsider dichotomy. Next slide. Through spending massive amounts of money and resources on retaliatory campaigns and AstroTurf, or fake grassroots organizations, such as the Friends of Coal, Faces of Coal, and Citizens for Coal, the industry has endeavored to convince local residents that being a good West Virginian or Kentuckian or Appalachian means being loyal to the coal industry. And being loyal to the coal industry means aligning oneself in opposition to the, quote, outsider tree huggers who are trying to put an end to mountaintop removal mining. Interestingly, there are many people in the Appalachian coalfields who do wish for an end to mountaintop removal mining, but this sentiment does not translate into public dissent. In fact, there seem to be significant fears among many local coalfield residents about becoming involved with the environmental justice organizations. Next slide. As one PhotoVoice participant from another community told me, quote, if you talk about the bad things that's happened because of coal mining, everybody's like, oh, you're against coal. Another participant unpacked this comment a bit, telling me, quote, when somebody says you're against coal, what they mean is you're against me. And once you're labeled as an outsider in that way, she explained, that doesn't go away. And Eileen told me that once word spread that she and her sister were associating with the environmental justice activists, quote, next slide, it backlashed on us, Shannon. We had repercussions over it. My research suggests that the fear of acquiring an outsider stigma by associating with environmental justice groups is an especially salient issue because it could have negative consequences for an individual's local networks and relationships. In a region that has suffered severe depletions in social capital, the fear of isolation and damaging important relationships may be a particularly strong deterrent against environmental justice movement participation. Next slide. This finding presents a significant dilemma for the future of the environmental justice movement in Central Appalachia. On the one hand, organizing high-profile social movement protests that lead to the arrest of celebrities and other non-locals does draw a great deal of media coverage and is a primary reason why mountaintop removal mining is no longer Appalachia's dirty little secret. However, the fact that my research participants disassociated themselves from the environmental justice movement because they felt the movement did not align with their personal values and identities indicates that the changing face of the coalfields movement may be actually deterring and disempowering a group of potential local social movement recruits. Next slide. As a feminist scholar, I would argue that all social movements aiming to help a group of people should attend to matters of disempowerment and underrepresentation. But I believe that there are also other compelling reasons beyond normative considerations that the movement should focus its efforts on recruiting more local people. The environmental justice platform is particularly influential because it's grounded in a struggle for human rights. The focus is on protecting people, which makes it possible for environmental justice movements to cross political boundaries more readily than mainstream environmental movements, allowing for a wider base of support. Moreover, local people also bring critical experiential knowledge of injustices to the movement. They know firsthand how pollution has compromised the health and safety of their families and communities. Thus, these movements need local voices, many local voices, to give credibility to the claims of injustice that form the basis of the environmental justice platform. If these movements lose their local identities, they may also lose their power. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for adapting your excellent presentation to our limited 30-minute time frame. You've given us a lot to think about, and now we're going to bring it all home to Alaska, and we're pleased that we have Carly Weir, that she's able to join us. Carly Weir is Coal Campaign Director with Cook Inletkeeper, a community-based nonprofit organization that combines advocacy, education, and science towards its mission to protect Alaska's Cook Inlet watershed and the life it sustains. Before joining Cook Inletkeeper, Carly was the Associate Campaign Director for Alaskans for Energy Freedom, and she also ran the Canvas teams and led the online communications at Alaska Center for the Environment. And prior to coming to Alaska, Carly served as the Executive Director of High Country Conservation Center in Colorado for 10 years. Welcome, Carly. You may go ahead and begin your presentation.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, there you are. Wonderful.
Yep, just wanted to make sure we were clear. Okay. Well, thanks, Diana and Shannon. That was an amazing presentation, and I can't wait to talk to you after this call. But we're going to focus a little bit on Alaska right now. So I think Alaska has a couple of unique traits, one of which is that we have a vast amount of coal under our lands and waterways. Alaska holds about 1/8 of the world's coal reserves and has about 40% more than the entire lower 48 combined. And that's about 5.5 trillion tons of coal with a T. Next slide. We're also unique in that we are really on the front lines of climate change. I mean, the impacts of climate change are rapid and apparent everywhere in Alaska. We're warming about twice as much as the rest of the United States. It's just something that is with us every day and that we just can't ignore. Next slide. I just want to take a minute and show you where coal reserves are in Alaska for those who are unfamiliar. Most of our coal here in Alaska is under the Arctic. About over 3 trillion tons of that 5.5 trillion tons is under the Arctic lands, and most of it is under the National Petroleum Reserve. And fortunately, the current management plan for the NPRA prohibits soft rock mining. So that coal under there right now is for most of our thinking, inaccessible at this time. However, because there's so much coal in Alaska, we really believe that the threat of coal development and turning Alaska into a coal state, in addition to what we're now perceived of as an oil state, is certainly possible. However, a lot of our coal fields are under South Central Alaska. So that pop-out box on the right-hand corner there shows where coal is under South Central Alaska. It's under the Kenai Peninsula, and there's a massive coal field across the inlet from Anchorage, the Susitna-Beluga coal field. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a particular project today there. However, I just want to point out that in Alaska, right now we have one operating coal mine. It's the Healy coal mine just outside of Denali National Park, owned and operated by Usabelli, which is not a big national, multinational corporation. It is a locally owned sort of mom and pop type coal mining operation here in Alaska. It's owned by Usabelli, and about half of the coal they mine is used in state for a handful of coal-fired power plants, mostly in the interior around Fairbanks. And then the other half, though that part is dwindling, is for export out of Seward. So next slide, and we're on slide number 4 now. I don't think my slides are numbered for you, but we're going to talk today a little bit about a project that is moving forward. I think most of us are aware that coal markets and the demand for coal are in decline, sharp decline, and a lot of export facilities in the Pacific Northwest are being shelved and tabled. Many of our proposed coal facilities here in Alaska have been shelved or tabled, at least temporarily, because of the lack of demand for coal overseas. Again, keeping in mind that most of the coal that you saw under that coal map would be slated for export because we don't have a demand or a need for coal here in Alaska right now. So one project that is moving forward despite this downturn in coal markets is the Chewitna coal mine. It's a mine that would have a severe impact to local communities. It would really devastate a river, and it also would set huge precedents for how we are managing our resources here in Alaska. The next slide, slide number 5, shows a detail map of the proposed Chewitna coal mine and the coal leases in the area. Developer Pac Rim, who you'll see as the gold or yellow color there, owns substantial leases in the Susitna-Beluga coal field right at the headwaters of the Chewitna River. Pac Rim is a privately owned company. They're based out of Delaware, but their ownership is primarily through the Hunt family in Texas. The red leases there, I want to point out, even though it says Barrick Gold, those are also coal leases. For those who are familiar with Alaska's land uses and land ownership, most of the coal leases that you see here are on Alaska Mental Health Trust and DNR state land. There are very, very small portions, particularly under the coal conveyor, that are owned by the Tyonek Native Corporation. But again, most of these coal leases are, the land is owned by the Alaska Mental Health Trust, which is another topic for another day. But you can see from this map here, there would be an 8-mile conveyor, a man-made bulkhead terminal, an island that would go 2 miles out into Cook Inlet. All of the coal would be slated for export overseas. And the dotted line that you'll see in that gold area, that's the first phase, just the first phase of the proposed Chewitna coal strip mine. Unlike mountaintop-removal, this would be an open pit coal strip mine instead of blowing up a mountain off the top. The proposal is to dig down about 300 feet. That white highlighted river area there would be completely removed and destroyed. Next slide, slide number 6. Just to put this into perspective, this is a massive coal proposal unlike anything that's ever been seen in Alaska before. Their plan calls for mining 12 million tons of coal for 25 years for a total of about 300 million tons. And that would put 100 to 200 container ships of coal leaving Alaska for export overseas every year. Even at its peak export out of Seward, Usabelli was only shipping about 12 container ships of coal every year. So that is a massive change and a massive new amount of coal that would potentially be leaving Alaska. Next slide. When we talk about the Chewitna coal mine and the impacts that it will have to people and also the future of land management in Alaska, a lot of what we're talking about is this image right here. This is sort of ground zero. This is an image of Middle Creek which is in that dotted line of the lease area I showed earlier. This is where Pac Rim intends to dig down 300 feet to mine coal for 25 years and really disrupt the complex groundwater and hydrology in this area that basically provides spawning and rearing habitat for salmon. Next slide. The Chewitna River is unique. We've got a lot of rivers and we've got a lot of salmon, certainly in Alaska, but the Chewitna River supports all 5 species of wild Pacific salmon. It's an amazing place. And that salmon is sort of at the heart of what concerns many people about the proposed Chewitna coal mine. The coal mine itself and the export facility would severely impact and actually decimate local set net fisheries that are on the shores of Cook Inlet around the mouth of the Chewitna River. This image here is one person, a fellow named Terry Jorgensen, who has been fishing in Alaska for decades. His set net lease site would be located directly under the export facility that Pac Rim intends to build into Cook Inlet. It would put him out of business, certainly, but it would also impact set netters all along that western side of Cook Inlet. The next slide. Most acutely, the Tyonek people would be affected by this proposed Chewitna coal strip mine. As practice and just as a way to honor and respect their own story and their own voice, I don't often like to speak about the impacts that the Chewitna coal mine would have on the native village of Tyonek. However, I think it's very fair and safe to say that they are incredibly concerned about this project. The Tyonek tribe has been living in the area for thousands of years. They hunt and fish and live on the Chewitna River. It is sort of the lifeblood of their community. Were this mine to go in, it would change their entire landscape and their entire way of life. And that is, it's just a tragedy of such immense magnitude. At the end, I will share some places you can learn a little bit more and learn about the story of the Tyonek people and how this project would potentially affect them. But here in Alaska, when we talk about environmental justice and social justice, a lot of what we are talking about and why people are connected to the Chewitna coal project and other remote mines and areas is because these projects have the potential to really devastate what we have right now as the lifeblood of Alaska, our salmon. This project in particular would potentially set a precedent for how Alaska is managing the need for non-renewable fossil fuel resources and sustainable long-term resources like salmon. Pac Rim Coal right now proposes to completely remove 13.7 miles of salmon spawning and rearing habitat, and that will be a sacrifice, not unlike the sacrifice zone of certain mountaintop areas in Appalachia. So we have mounted a campaign and an effort to stop this project, but much of the language and the story that Shannon was telling resonates very intensely with our work here in Alaska. The next slide, slide number 12. This is an image of some of the most intense hardcore activists I have ever met in my entire life, in my long career as a community organizer. This is a picture of Larry and Judy Heilman. They live in Beluga, which is the small off-the-road town on the west side of Cook Inlet near the mouth of the Chewitna River. They built their homestead and raised their children and have lived in this area for decades. They were one of the first local residents to become aware of the proposed Chewitna coal mine and start to speak out against it. Larry had been working for years in the natural gas plant. Judy was a preschool teacher and a mother and a grandmother. Neither of them ever envisioned themselves as anti-coal activists. And I think even today, I think they are some of our strongest voices here in Alaska against the impacts of climate change, knowing that this coal would be exported from basically their hunting grounds and their fishing grounds overseas, burned, where mercury emissions come back to Alaska and are embedded in our fish that we eat, while also contributing to climate change. It's just too much. So I just want to honor these activists here in Alaska right now. Again, don't want to speak for them, but they are sort of the core of our ragtag bunch of groups here working to stop the proposed Chewitna coal mine. We are expecting draft permits and an environmental impact statement out potentially this fall. Unfortunately, we are beholden to the timeline that is driven by Pac Rim, the developer. So just recently, actually a couple days ago on the phone with Judy, she relayed to me that she feels held hostage by Pac Rim, that they can't move forward. They don't know what is going to happen to their community and their backyards. So it's a long-term fight right here in Alaska. And then the next slide, finally. There's a lot to say about coal and the Chewitna coal mine and the people who are fighting against it. There are 4 websites listed on this slide that I encourage you to look at and learn a little bit more. On several of them, there's a short 30-minute film that tells the story of the Chewitna River, the people working to stop it, including some folks from the native village of Tyonek, the Heilmans who you saw in that last picture, and some of the local fishermen who would be impacted by this project. If you're in Alaska, I hope you'll learn when the environmental impact statement comes out, potentially later this year, because we will need many voices to help show our decision makers that Alaskans are concerned about the future of our state and this project in particular. And that is all. Diana?
Okay, thank you so much, Carly. And now we have some time to invite questions and comments from our participants. So if you'd like to ask a question, please press *2 to unmute your line. And it's helpful if you state your name and where you're from or your affiliation.
Hi, this is Kate McLaughlin. You hear me?
Hi.
Hi,
yes.
I'm Shannon Elizabeth, Executive Director and President. We're located in Prince William Sound, which is on the other side of the Kenai Peninsula. Cook Inletkeeper is our sister organization. The coal fields that we're most concerned about are the Bering River coal reserves, which are actually up in the headwaters of the Copper River Delta. It's an important watershed, huge watershed that greatly influences Prince William Sound. There's some different things going on with the Bering River coal fields. I should say, environmental organizations such as EAC Preservation Council and some others, both national and local, have been trying to get the U.S. government to secure those coal fields. And they are in the process of negotiation with the owners, which I believe are Asian. I believe that the majority of the leases on the Bering River are owned by a Chinese entity. So it's a kind of a different kind of fight, but it is still very much on our minds. And it's just curious with the way that coal is tanking on the international market. So many other industries are slowing down their production, not redeveloping. How it seems like they think that they can come into Alaska and do like their last hurrah up here, and that we're not really paying attention. So I just wanted to ask you, Carly, what your thoughts are on comparing, contrasting our 2 different problems with the coal industry in Alaska.
Yeah, very fascinating and different approaches to protecting big areas that have coal lying underneath them, and I hope they're both successful. I think you're right. The markets should be the driving force for many decisions that are being made about coal investments right now, and we can see the impacts of the downturn of the global coal market very acutely with the exports going out of Seward from Usabelli. The Seward export facility was shuttered for most of the winter. There is a coal ship expected to come in and leave port soon if it hasn't already. But instead of dealing with massive, millions of tons of coal leaving Alaska, we're talking about maybe a couple of ships right now. And I think Usabelli and their mine operation has also slowed down in Healy because of the lack of buyers in the export market. Pac Rim and probably like the Bering Sea coal leases are owned by a private company, so we actually don't know a lot about them. The one thing we do know about Pac Rim is they don't have experience opening and operating coal mines, so our best understanding and best guess is that they intend to seek the permits for this project so that they can hold on to them and potentially sell them at a later date. They've been trying to permit this project, or let me rephrase that, they have been very slowly working through the permitting process for this project for nearly a decade now. So they've put certainly some time and resources into it, but it's hard to know what the calculations are. I think those of us fighting coal nationally and globally are hoping that the downturn in coal markets is indeed systemic and not cyclical, and that will hopefully put an end to many of these small mine proposals, several in the Mat-Su Valley. Usabelli's proposed Wishbone Hill coal mine in the Mat Valley appears to be dormant for the time being, but it is a permitted mine, so if coal markets turn up, there is certainly the potential that that could become an active mine, really impacting the local community that lives near the area much more similarly to the Appalachian story than Chewitna, which is a very remote off-road system. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think you're right. Alaska still, for many people, is the Wild West of resource development, where just about anything goes. And with the state of our budget right now, I think decision makers are unfortunately looking for another sort of golden opportunity with different resources, since oil is not the panacea it used to be for Alaska.
Can I add something in here as well? So something else that may be going on is this phenomenon called the green paradox. And this is a concept that was developed by an economist. His last name is Sinn, S-I-N-N. And he argues that reductions in fossil fuel use or increases in regulation. So, seeing it coming down the pike that we're going to have stricter regulations on carbon emissions actually encourages encourages companies to extract fossil fuels more quickly, because the owners of the fossil fuel reserves see these like green policy measures as a threat to their future markets. And so when future reductions in carbon emissions are announced, fossil fuel companies and owners kind of try to preempt the corresponding wealth losses by extracting and selling their fossil fuels before the markets disappear. So it can actually have the effect of accelerating fossil fuel extraction. And so I don't know, but that could be part of what's going on as well. And like you mentioned, seeing Alaska as like, oh, maybe people aren't going to notice. This may be an area that's being targeted for that.
Thank you, Shannon. Are there other people who would like to ask questions? If so, please press *2 to unmute your line. We still have a few minutes, and I know that Shannon's presentation really raised a lot of questions about how to organize in a way where people aren't alienated from their own communities. Seems like a topic that is of particular importance in Alaska, where there's many different resources at play. So where protecting fisheries is something that people can stand behind in opposition to coal, but it's still sort of, it's still part of the idea that it's okay to extract from the environment and to use environmental resources. So I feel like there's a little bit less perhaps stigmatizing of people who are active to defend that way of life.
Yeah, hearing about it, sorry, I'll just interject.
Yeah, please.
Not related to my coal research, but there actually seem to be some really interesting parallels with some of the research I'm doing right now in Kentucky around organizing against pipelines, natural gas liquids pipelines. And so these are the, super toxic byproducts of fracking. So it's not methane that would travel in these, but it's those liquids that would be shipped overseas to use as feedstock for petrochemical plants. And in Kentucky, there's a lot of local identity around horse racing. We just had the Kentucky Derby, so it's probably on your minds as well, but bourbon and horse racing. And so these NGL pipelines that have been proposed to go through the state would cause huge threats to the water supply in Kentucky, because we have this geology that's called karst, where there are basically sinkholes and caves underground. And so a rupture in a pipeline would, of this toxic substance going through, could potentially contaminate water supplies for a very, very far distance in Kentucky, because they would get into the underground caves and travel really quickly. And so we had, in 2014, there was this amazing mobilization of people from a variety of backgrounds. So it wasn't just like these sort of radical lefty activists who were organizing against the pipeline. It was conservative farmers who who are worried about the pipeline going through the eminent domain worries, that they were land rights, that they were going to affect their rights on their lands. And then there were the horse farm folks who want to protect their very expensive investment of these horses that could be damaged from contamination from water supplies, and then also the bourbon industry, which uses, of course, a lot of water. And then there were also nuns and monks involved. The pipeline would have gone through their property. But anyway, it was this amazing coalition of people who rallied around very different interests, but had this common ground of not wanting the pipeline to go through. And so it sounds to me like the Alaska case, there are a lot of different identities at play here, and a lot of potential organizing that can go across these identities. And so it's not just these radical lefty environmentalists who want to save, it's also the fishermen, and it's also the native tribes, and so it just seems like this would be a really, that organizing in Alaska and, could be pretty successful. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Do we have anyone else who would like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, hi, Diana. This is Pam with Alaska Community Action on Toxics. First of all, thank you, Shannon and Carly, for your wonderful presentations. And my question is for Shannon. I'm just curious. I know your book came out last month, and I've just been wondering, have you seen any kind of public consequences or industry response to the book, and also how do you think, or how have you seen it affecting the people and the communities that you've been interviewing and working with?
Yeah, so I haven't actually seen much yet. I don't know if this is because it's an academic press, and so people just aren't really hip to it. But interestingly, I mean, the book really, it'll be interesting to see kind of what the response is, because in many ways, I kind of feel like the book actually gives more voice to the local people who are not speaking out against the industry, because it's really about how the local people feel about coal and why they don't want to speak out against the industry. And so I've talked with, in doing the research for the book, a lot of the photo voice women I've gone and done follow-up interviews with, and a lot of those interviews are part of the book as well, and asking them, why do you think that the Photo Voice Project didn't end up kind of pushing a bunch of people to become activists? And what they, kept telling me again and again, and this is the same story that I got when I lived in the area, when I was doing community organizing work around public health issues before I started this research. What I would hear again and again is just this idea of our identities are so wrapped up in supporting the coal industry. I mean, we just saw this actually with the primaries. West Virginia went to Bernie Sanders, and unfortunately, it wasn't really as much about people really being excited about his policies. It was more about Hillary Clinton having said something about putting coal miners and coal companies out of business, and this made a lot of people really angry at her, even though Bernie Sanders' policy, proposals would be more extreme. But the fact that she had sort of threatened this coal identity that people really rallied around really was bad for her and for her potentially winning West Virginia. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the reaction is because it's a tricky. The conclusion is pretty tricky because it's like obviously coal is on its way out, but this is also really threatening to the local identity of folks living in this area who the one thing that Appalachians have been held up for providing for the United States has been coal. And so when that's taken away, what's left is all the negative portrayals of the region, the hillbilly stereotypes and things like that. And so coal is kind of the one thing that people could be proud of. And so I think that has a lot to do with the threat that they're perceiving from that. So.
Thank you. And I do believe that we're just about out of time. I did want to give Carly an opportunity to make any final remarks if she'd like, and then I do have a few announcements. And I also just want to say it seems like there's a lot more that we can all learn from each other on this question of environmental justice and how to organize. So perhaps we could have more like a strategy call or something in the future and get some leadership from different organizations together to participate, and invite you as well, Shannon, to present your insights from your research. Yeah, but again, Carly, if you'd like to say anything else, please go ahead.
No, I just want to say thank you. This was really a fascinating conversation and has sparked all sorts of thoughts about how we're approaching our work, and I would appreciate that call that you just referenced, Diana. I think we have a lot to learn, and I think Alaska has some amazing stories that perhaps Shannon could help us tell.
Oh, yes. What a great idea.
I would love to be involved in something like that. So.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll all be in touch then after the call, and I will be also sending out a follow-up email when the MP3 recording is available. So if there are folks that weren't able to be on the call that you know of who wanted to be, make sure to let them know about that so they can listen to the podcast. Let's see, what else? A couple more announcements. Our next call will be on Wednesday, June 15th, and it will be about mercury pollution, which Carly referenced. Look for an announcement with call details within the next week, I hope. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to announce a special event that Alaska Community Action on Toxics is convening this fall. We'll be holding a Children's Environmental Health Summit on October 5th and 6th at Alaska Pacific University in Anchorage. And the summit will address environmental health and health disparities of children at the top of the world and ways that we can work together to ensure healthy homes, child care facilities, schools, and communities. We have some amazing speakers coming. Ruth Etzel, who's the Director of the Office of Children's Health Protection with the EPA, Maureen Swanson from Learning Disabilities Association of America. The list goes on and on. Charlotte Brody, National Coordinator of Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. Just scrolling through the list here. Anyway, it's quite impressive, and it's going to be an amazing event. So mark your calendars now, October 5th and 6th at APU. And finally, if you found today's presentation and discussion valuable, I hope you'll consider making a contribution to support these calls, and you can do so at akaction.org. Just click on the donate button. So thanks again to everyone who called in, our wonderful presenters. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.